Well, good afternoon and welcome to the second in our Provincial Leaders Speaker Series presented by Manulife. My name is Ian McLean and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self and receive the same respect and opportunity regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you'll join us in fostering a positive environment here today to ensure a safe and welcoming space for all. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors and partners of today's event. Without their support, these types of programs would never be possible. So thank you to our title sponsor, Manulife, our prestige sponsor, Deloitte, the platinum sponsor, Google, silver sponsor, Clack, our bronze sponsor today is the KW Association of Realtors, and our event partner, the Guelph Chamber of Commerce. And I'm joined by my colleague, President CEO, Shakiba Shayani. And also thank you to our hosts here at Cellar 52 and Guilt Catering for your hospitality. Please join me in welcoming and thanking these incredible partners. I'd like to introduce just a couple of dignitaries that are joining us today. We have Mayor Barry Verbanovic from City of Kitchener, Mayor Dave Jaworski from the City of Waterloo. I'm not sure if we have any of our board members not with us today, but I think there's a few joining us online. So thank you to them and for their support. And thank you to all of you that are joining us virtually for today's session. I'd now like to welcome Jeff Alcock from Manulife to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Ian. On behalf of Manulife, we are proud to be sponsoring the Provincial Leaders Speaker Series. As longstanding partners in the community and with the Chamber of Commerce, it's our honor to do this today. Stephen Del Duca has been hard at work for 30 years with the Liberal Party as a local campaign volunteer, a riding president, a campus club president, a political staffer, a campaign manager, an executive council member, a candidate, an MPP, and a cabinet minister. Stephen Del Duca was first elected to the Ontario Legislature in September 2012 and served in cabinet as Minister of Transportation and as Minister of Economic Development and Growth. He brought two driving principles to that table: dignity for workers and support for entrepreneurship. Prior to his election, he had a long record of community involvement and a dedication to public service. Stephen was the fundraising chair for the annual Vaughan Hospital Fundraising Gala that raised over $1 million, and the driving force behind the Greater Toronto Region Economic Summit that was established in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis to find solutions and map a path to recovery. Stephen is a first-generation Canadian, the son of a Scottish mother and an Italian father. His parents came to Canada looking for opportunity, and they found it. Stephen wants to build an Ontario where genuine opportunity is real for everyone, where both entrepreneurs and workers can thrive. And the individual success is only limited by talent, effort, and dedication. He lives in Vaughan with his wife and their two daughters. We have that in common. And their dogs, Hunter and Sammy. Please join me in welcoming Stephen Del Duca.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real delight for me to be here with all of you today. I'm really happy that in the bio we mentioned the daughters before the dogs. I don't want to get in trouble when I get back home later today. As I said, it's really awesome for me to be here with all of you today. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation that I'm going to be having with Ian. I want to thank you, Ian, and your entire team for giving me this chance today for what I know is such an important conversation, because we're just about a couple of months away from the next voting day, the next election day here in the province of Ontario. And there are so many critically important issues that we do need to think about here, certainly in this region, right across the province of Ontario. Lessons that I think we're all hopeful that we've learned as a result of what the last 2 years have been like. Really, really extraordinarily difficult for Ontarians in every corner of the province. I'm really thrilled to be joined here today, certainly by all of you, but in particular, I do want to highlight that there are some of the Ontario Liberal Party candidates who are running for us in the next election, in this election, here across this region, who are joining us both here in person today, but also virtually. I'm just going to ask them to stand and be recognized, if that's okay with you, Ian. They're here in the room, please. We have Sarika Shenoy, we have Kelly Stice. I saw Ishmael Mohammed. Oh, there's Ishmael Mohammed right there, and of course Rami Saad. I believe I have everyone who's here in the room with us right now. And I believe we have Rochelle Devereaux and Melanie Van Alphen, who are watching virtually as well. I just have to say, and I know we're going to get into a lot of really important topics, certainly from all the discussions I've heard over the past number of months, as Ontario Liberals begin to release important details of our election platform, I want to draw your attention to a couple of things that I announced just a few days ago. In particular, what I'm talking about is the Ontario Liberal Party's plan for economic dignity. This is something that I'm really, really proud of. It's something that's important to me at a very personal level. One of the things that you will all know, and I've heard even in our conversation earlier today, the impact of the last couple of years on the small business community that we have here in Waterloo Region and right across the province it's been really devastating. It's been really, really tough, in particular in tourism, hospitality, and other very exposed sectors. One of the things that doesn't make it into my official bio, but I'm very proud to talk about, is that my mom, my Scottish mom, decided many, many years ago, towards the end of her working career, in fact, to open her own small business. The reason I highlighted that she's my Scottish mom is because she chose to open a business in downtown Toronto that sold fresh pasta and was an espresso bar, right? Hard to believe, right, Dave? But I can still remember, I look back at that point in our family, the long hours that she put into that business. She literally poured her heart and soul into that effort, all the paperwork she had to deal with, managing the payroll and staff, no time off, no holidays, none of it. But she made it work. She made it work. And the small business entrepreneurs that we have in this province literally do light the spark that drives the engine of Ontario's economy. And it has been so tough over the last couple of years. So in our plan for economic dignity, we included a series of ideas that we do think will help small businesses not just survive, but be able to go on to thrive. So two that I'm going to highlight here before we start our conversation, Ian. Number one, we believe in our plan that the small businesses in Ontario that have been hardest hit by the pandemic should pay no small business corporate income tax for at least 2 years. For 2 years following the election, to give them a chance to catch their breath, to give them a chance to not have that extra pressure, especially since so many are already carrying a very significant debt load. Secondly, because I want us to be able to do more to unlock the potential of small business entrepreneurs, we want more people to take that same calculated risk that my mom did years ago. We are also in our plan calling for the elimination of the incorporation fees for business startups moving forward. So two ideas that I wanted to highlight. On the other side of the equation, because you're not going to have economic dignity if you don't actually have a plan that supports workers and their families. And during this pandemic, I think we've all seen that far too often, those workers who showed up every single day, who did all of the work that was essential, whether in healthcare or in education or in the private sector, keeping our store shelves stocked, keeping our economy rolling, were in far too many cases, far too many situations, not provided with the right kind of protection. So for workers and their families in particular, as part of achieving economic dignity, the Ontario Liberal Plan calls for the creation of a portable benefits package for workers across the province who do not already have benefits in place that meet a certain minimal threshold. We've seen how the economy has shifted over the last number of years. More people who are self-employed, more people in the so-called gig economy. I believe it's important for there to be a standard minimum floor of support, a social safety net and an economic safety net that catches up to and is aligned to the kind of economy that we have in Ontario today. Whether it's prescription drug care or it's dental care, mental health care, a pathway to retirement, all of those elements I believe are critically important. One more thing, and then I know Ian wants me to stop my monologue so we can have the conversation. I can feel that energy right now. I just want to talk about the minimum wage for a second. It's become a bit of a political football over the last number of years, and I think that's unfortunate. I will say in the plan that we released just a couple of days ago, we did say that we would move the minimum wage in Ontario to $16 an hour to start. But I think far more importantly, in a more impactful way, I think it's time for us to move away from the discussion of minimums. We don't believe that we'll ever achieve maximum economic dignity if we're always talking about the minimums that keep us spiraling in that race to the bottom. That's why I think, because we have a province that is diverse, because we have different regions that have different needs and different circumstances, an Ontario Liberal government would move, working with all of our partners in the private sector, not-for-profit, municipal partners, academics, and others, to make sure that we have a dynamic, regionally adjusted living wage, so that the women and men who show up and work hard every single day, do their part, sacrifice, and are dedicated, can truly support themselves and their families. So those are just some of the highlights of our plan, our Ontario Liberal plan for economic dignity, that I'm very proud of. And I'm now going to turn it over to Ian so I can face all of his tough questions. Thanks, Ian.
Well, as a son of a former politician who also is a minister, giving someone a mic and letting them go on a monologue is a dangerous thing, and I'm part of that. Listen, thank you, first of all, to my staff for pulling this together. This is only our second event in 2 years, so thank you to you and your staff for making yourself available to be here and discuss these questions and the issues that are so important to Waterloo Region, but also the province. I'll do my best to keep us on time. If Carolyn starts waving at the back of the room at about just before 1 o'clock, you'll know it's time to wrap up, as will I.
And I'll do my best to keep my answers short.
Yeah,
Ian, I promise.
that's okay. We got lots to get through here. Now, I'm going to start you with probably the easiest question of the day. But I have 2 daughters as well and a dog. So what kind of dogs do you have?
Okay, so I was going to say, what kind of daughters do you have?
Well,
they're angels. They're like their mother. They're angels. Okay. We have Hunter is an Australian Shepherd, and Sammy is a yellow lab.
Yeah. I have a yellow lab too. So
there you go. Kinship
is growing here. Listen, the theme for this series, with all of the leaders that we're going to have, and we hosted Andrew Horvath yesterday. We'll have Mr. Schreiner and the Premier in coming days, is Ontario reopening and staying open safely. And that's going to cover a whole range of issues. We heard a lot of those this morning in our private conversation. So these questions will sound familiar to you, but we want to make sure that's available for all of our members and for the business community listening. I think I'll position this as the Business Economic Support Team of Waterloo Region, which is the 2 chambers of commerce, Cambridge and Guelph, and KW, along with our partner Shakiba, who is from Guelph, but Communitech and Explore Waterloo, which is hospitality and tourism, Waterloo Economic Development Corporation. We're working collaboratively, and a lot of these questions came from what are the issues that affect all of us together. The first thing I would say, and it's going to lead to our the Liberal Party, everyone has supported all-day two-way go, coming from Toronto right to here. You knew that was part of the ethanol pledge that you got to make every time you came to Waterloo Region for probably a dozen years. It's coming to fruition. We assume that that's everyone is in agreement that needs to be done, because that's going to be one of those pieces for economic growth. Healthcare has been one of the issues that has really affected us over the last 2 years. Aside from the first lockdown, every lockdown has been in large part due to the healthcare system being overwhelmed. Here in Waterloo Region, we know that we have one of the fastest growing areas in the country. We've been at over capacity for years. Our community is going to grow within exponentially in the next 20 years to over 900,000. We also know we've had the lowest per capita beds in the community. So I'm leading to the next ethanol pledge that everyone's going to get to make until we get our new hospital here that is so essential in Waterloo Region. I guess we're not looking for the commitment of the new hospital that is going to be required to fuel retaining and recruiting talent to serving our community, which is also a regional hospital. I think you heard that from Lee Fairclough this morning. but it is important for us to take that next step, demonstrate that we have a need here in the region. So I guess the first question is, will your government be supportive of the resources needed for the next stage? I think it's like about a $12 million ask to do the study that the Ministry of Health needs, so we can demonstrate the need here in Waterloo Region.
100% yes.
That's good. Clap.
See, I told you, I told you, I would keep my answer short.
No, well, that's good.
But,
That's
but
good.
can I just add in a quick
Yes,
piece?
absolutely.
Okay. So 100% yes, there's no doubt about it. As Ian set that question up and explained, as you all know, how great the need is. And it was a need that's been growing for some time. Obviously, during the pandemic, we've all learned in a very stark way, a very real way, how important it is to make sure that our healthcare system is both exceptional and accessible, but also resilient. So you need more beds, you need more service, you need to I'll say modernize the existing physical structures that you have for sure. I went through this in my own home community of Vaughan a number of years ago. I had the chance to be, before I became an MPP, I had the chance to be a community volunteer helping to raise money for what has now become Vaughan's Hospital, and to go through each of those stages as a resident of Vaughan when you're looking for the planning grants, when you're looking for the financial support just to keep the process going. So I know it can be a little bit, it can be sometimes, it can feel like it's tough to navigate. It can feel like it's a little bit slower than it needs to be. Not only will an Ontario Liberal government say yes to the need for an immediate planning grant of that $10 to $12 million that we're talking about, I think it's so important for the community here to understand what the rest of the path looks like. And so, this is true not just of what we're talking about in Waterloo Region, but I think across the board, it's an awfully opaque system. You're never quite sure what the next stage is when. Well, that's not true. You know what the next stage is, but you're not quite sure when you're going to get there, how long it's going to take. And I think we can do a far better job of being very open and transparent within communities about what timelines look like, what the planning process looks like, where you sit in that queue or in that process. And I think that's the best way to go about it. So yes to the planning grant, but I also want to make sure you know I'm keen. I would be keen, and I am keen now, but I'd certainly be keen as Premier to work closely with Waterloo Region and St. Mary's and Grand River to make sure that you're moving forward in the right direction with solid and consistent momentum.
That's great to hear, and it's so important for this community. Let's talk about COVID, and it's not about looking back; it's about the fact that we're not past it yet. I think ultimately, what we know is there's still lots of disease around. We're told yesterday, I guess, although some of us would have seen the numbers, we're into another wave, likely to have one in the fall. One thing, and I think you heard this from the mayors, you've heard it from the business community, from the university sector, from private sector, we can't close down again. We have the tools. We know that we have the tools to be able to continue to do business and do it safely, but we have to use the tools and we have to learn the lessons that we've learned. And that's, I guess, the message from our Best Waterloo group of all the business community is we can't close down. So what's the plan moving forward? And I guess the theme, I think we said this morning, our two chambers of commerce piloted across Ontario, and in fact, first in the country, of getting rapid screening kits to businesses. We've now to date over 1.2 million rapid screening to businesses and organizations across Waterloo Region. We're still waiting. Close to 300,000 orders are waiting to be filled. We're encouraging all of our businesses and organizations, not-for-profits, to continue to do rapid screening as one of those tools right through probably next year. That it's going to take a period of time. We also know that maybe seasonal masks mandates might be required. Fourth, a booster is going to be important. All of those things we know are the things, and social distancing when you can, like being smart about it. So I guess, and then the final part is making sure that schools are open, because you can't have businesses open if kids are not in school. So I guess that the question is, what's the plan? What's the Liberal plan to kind of take those things that we know that COVID is still here and still keep the economy open?
No, it's such an important question. You know, I talked earlier about the lessons that we've learned over the past couple of years, and Ian, in your question, you highlighted some of the examples of what you've done here locally and regionally to make sure that you're on the most solid footing you can possibly be on around the rapid tests, around helping to support the transition for many businesses to start producing personal protective equipment over the past couple of years when, as I heard this morning, and I knew already, we in this province did not have the domestic capacity to do that at the start of this pandemic. I think I think we've made exceptional progress in this province, and I think we should be, in some respects, very proud of how we've come through a very difficult couple of years as a people. But I also think, and Ontario Liberals have said this all the way through the pandemic, we have not wavered once. We have to at all times listen to the best medical science, the best medical advice that is available to us. And I know sometimes that's been hard. It's been hard for a lot of politicians to listen to that advice because, well, let's face it, politicians like to be popular, and some of the decisions that have to have been made, sometimes were made early enough, sometimes were not. And that, that can be hard because people have been very understandably passionate about how we've gone forward to confront COVID. So I think all the way through, we have to continue to be careful, thoughtful, methodical. To me, one of the important lessons of COVID is that even though it can be very difficult to have to make a tough choice earlier on with that best medical advice, the best scientific advice supporting that decision, it's actually better in the long run to make the hard decision that might in the moment feel unpopular, because when you don't, and there have been multiple examples of this during COVID in Ontario alone, when you don't make that decision early enough and decisively enough, you have to make a far tougher and more difficult decision later on. And that's, I think, just the nature of dealing with a virus like this one, dealing with a pandemic. And so being thoughtful, being vigilant, as you pointed out, the physical distancing, masking where appropriate, when appropriate, supporting every venue, every opportunity, every bit of personal choice or freedom individual Ontarians have or want to use around the masks themselves, for sure. One of the things that I'm still gravely concerned about with two daughters at home, even though both have received their vaccines, is that in our youngest kids who are eligible still to receive the vaccine, the kids under 12, I look at those numbers and they're lower than I'd like them to be. They're a lot lower than I'd like them to be. Ontario Liberals at every turn have actually called on the current provincial government to invest more of an effort to raise confidence, raise awareness, and try to get that specific number up as high as possible. Last time I saw it, and maybe I'm wrong about this number, but it was below 40% of kids in that age group that have both doses. That's not high enough as far as I'm concerned. So that's an example, I think, of one of the things that we can do. You talked about rapid tests. I think they have to be broadly deployed. They have to be free at all times. We have to make it easy for people to be able to access that particular technology to keep themselves safe. But again, I just want to stress, we all want to be through COVID. There's not a single Ontarian I know who doesn't want to be at the other side of this ordeal. But I think Ian makes a good point. As tough as the last 2 years have been, if at any moment, because a government leader or an individual or a collection of individuals makes a decision or makes decisions that are just a little bit haphazard, just a little bit reckless, we cannot afford to go backwards. We psychologically as a province, economically as a province, socially as a province, we have to do everything we can to make sure that our progress to get to the other side of the pandemic is steady, it is methodical, it is responsible. And I'm convinced we can do that, but we just have to make sure that we are using every tool in the toolkit to make that happen.
Okay, I want to weave together a couple of things because sometimes I think they get discussed as separate issues as if they're not connected. Environment, the climate change issue, energy, because they all impact business and communities. Affordability of electricity for both consumers and for business is really important. The reliability of our power generation system and our distribution system. We know that there's going to be more impact on the needs for electricity with more electrification of transit, with certainly the great news out of Windsor about the battery plant, and the full court press of having electric vehicles sooner rather than later. But that also speaks to infrastructure that's going to be required. We heard from our friends from Toyota yesterday. We have 15,000 charging stations. If we're going to hit our targets, we need something in the order of millions, literally millions of charging stations in Ontario. So they're all important issues: climate, hitting our targets, the importance of affordability of energy, the reliability of energy. How do you bring all those things together in a plan that actually is coherent? Because some of it's going to require investment, some of it's going to require regulation and legislation, which is change. How do you bring all those things together?
So this is one of the most important things that we have to consider as a province for the immediate term. And I'm sad to say this, it's something that we don't talk about enough. You know, I would say, Ian, you pointed, the way you described it, you know, what do we have to do to plan to be ready? Well, there is actually no plan right now. There is literally no plan in Ontario right now that will help make sure that we have the electricity generation that we're going to need, not in 10 years, not in 15 years, not in 20 years, but when the Pickering nuclear facility comes offline in 3 or 4 years. I always forget if it's 2025 or 2026. I think it's 2025. It's just around the corner. Ontario's capacity to generate the electricity that we need today will drop significantly. And there is no plan in place that I've seen or that I've been able to find anywhere from the current provincial government that explains how that short-term gap will be met. But then it gets worse. And it gets worse because in order to actually properly confront the climate crisis, as Ian pointed out, we need to dramatically scale up our ability to electrify everything. So when you think about Pickering coming offline in 3 years, no real plan in place to meet existing demand, and then watching the numbers take off on how much we want to electrify in order to build a cleaner, greener society and economy, this is, and if the other people running to be premier don't understand this, then that's a pretty scary spot to be in. This needs to be an urgent discussion at the first cabinet meeting of the next Ontario government, because you don't, whether it's through regulatory change or setting up a conservation first policy, building in more supports for renewables or energy storage, looking at small modular reactors within the nuclear space, all of that, talking to our neighboring jurisdictions like Quebec and others about how we can bring in more of what we're going to need over the next 3, 10, 15, 20 years so that we don't have to rely on fossil fuels. This is a conversation that needs to start urgently, and it's not happening right now. I don't want to be excessively partisan here today, but what I'm sharing with you in this moment is very well known by people inside the current government, and they don't have a plan to deal with it, and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to scare anyone. But you know, you mentioned electric vehicles. 5 years ago, I made the decision, my wife and I did, to get our first electric vehicle, a Chevrolet Bolt, like B with as in Bob, Bolt, pure battery electric. I love it. I'm never going back. The van that I get the chance to travel around the province in, that's a Chrysler Pacifica hybrid, plug-in hybrid. I love this technology. But in order for us, as Ian said, to go from where we are today to how many more people we want to be purchasing or leasing electric vehicles, you need the charging infrastructure. I think you need an incentive in place to make it more affordable for consumers to make the transition. That's why an Ontario Liberal government will reinstate a provincial electric vehicle incentive program of up to $8,000, combined with the federal incentive of $5,000 for a total of $13,000 off the sticker price of an electric vehicle. And you need the charging infrastructure. You have the vehicles and you have the charging infrastructure, but you don't have the electricity being generated. It's a huge, huge problem. So any politician, almost done, any politician who stands here in Waterloo Region and tells you with a straight face that they support electrification, that they have a real desire to confront the climate crisis, but they don't have a realistic or responsible plan to meet the gap we're going to have in electricity generation, is not competent enough to have the job of being your premier.
Well, I just wanted to follow up. There's a number of things that are coming in the electricity space is companies going behind the grid or being off grid. The other part, which I think is important, and you raised, is the distribution side is something can be a big part of the solution, but needs to be addressed. There is green energy in Manitoba and Quebec. Quebec doesn't work with our system very well, and getting connected with Manitoba. So, I mean, I guess I would echo that conversation needs to happen, because they all need to fit together. You cannot, the advanced manufacturers, the auto sector, advanced manufacturing, agri-food doesn't happen without power, and it needs to be affordable to be competitive. So it's power generation. It's what we're putting onto the system, and I think you're right. That does need to be a conversation. And I guess the last question, and I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer this one, is it strikes me as these are such big decisions that they don't lend themselves to the electoral cycle, because it would be hard to have these conversations and make a decision, but they need to be made.
Well, they do, because I don't think anyone in this room wants to be in a situation where, because there is no current plan from the Conservative government, and perhaps there is no realistic plan from any of the other opposition parties aside from the Ontario Liberal Party. I mean, do we want to be in a world where in 3, 4, or 5 years we have to choose between brownouts and blackouts or fighting climate change? I don't think that's where we want to be. It's not good for the economy, obviously. It's not good for society. But the fact of the matter is, because for the past 4 years, we have been dragged backwards on the climate fight, and we don't have the current government talking about a real plan to confront or deal with this electricity generation gap we're about to have to deal with. This is the problem. This is why we find ourselves in this dilemma. And you're right. Elections are not always the easiest time to have a very thoughtful, responsible conversation, though they should be. And I'm really hoping that this upcoming campaign will be that kind of campaign, a very healthy clash of ideas. But this is an important topic that I don't think enough of us are talking about right now. We got to confront the climate crisis. We have to support electrification, but we need clean energy generation sources and capacity to get us to where we need to be.
Okay, housing. We talked about this morning, and both our mayors draw the connection between affordability of housing, accessibility of housing, assisted housing, addictions and homelessness. I mean, all of these issues which impact us, and Lee talked about how that impacts the healthcare system. It's all integrated. And I guess the question broadly is, what's the housing plan? But inside of that, there are a bunch of things in the housing task force recommendation, to limit exclusionary zoning, because ultimately this is about supply. It's about supply. It's about different types of housing in already built up urban areas. So I mean, maybe I'd take that one, but as part of the larger plan, affordability for consumers, but also having the ability to build more units, and from the private sector is going to have to deliver, because it can't be done by government.
Well, let me just say, I don't know about all of you. I found yesterday's announcement by the current provincial government to be extraordinarily underwhelming. And I say that not simply because it's not a partisan comment. I mean, it's the 4th year of their mandate. The housing affordability crisis didn't start in January of this year. By my count, this is the 3rd or 4th housing plan coming from the current government. And yet, as a dad with young kids, when I looked at the plan that we saw announced yesterday, I saw nothing in there for first-time homebuyers. When you think about one of the first acts of the current government was to eliminate support for renters, for tenants, I saw nothing in yesterday's report or plan that talks about those who are renting or who are looking to rent. Right now in Ontario, over the last couple of years, the last 4 years, we've seen the average price of a home climb by $500,000. And for the first time ever, the average price of a home in the province is $1 million. It's a scary conversation to have with your partner or your spouse about where will your 15-year-old daughter or your soon-to-be 11-year-old daughter, where are they going to live? Where will they be afford to live, whether it's in Waterloo Region or the GTA? And by the way, this is no longer just a GTHA, Waterloo Region, Ottawa conversation. This is a conversation that is now seeped out to communities much further away from our largest urban centers or regions. And I think that's a real problem. Ian, you made a point about the private sector is going to have to be the mechanism to get this job done. And I'm a really big believer in the private sector's capacity to do extraordinary things. I'm going to say, if the market forces on their own could solve this problem, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. And what I've seen from the Conservative plan and from the New Democrat and Green plan is that we are not talking yet about being deliberate enough or purposeful enough in the decision making and the mechanisms we're bringing to bear to actually deal with what is well beyond a crisis. And as you pointed out, it has to be all forms of housing, truly supportive housing, deeply affordable housing, market priced housing, rental housing, student housing. It is a big picture. None of it is affordable right now. None of it is accessible right now. None of it is within reach right now. And again, to think that we've gotten to this state here in Ontario, I think is, it could be discouraging, but I'm an optimist by nature. And the Ontario Liberal plan that we are working on, that we'll be releasing, I promise, before Election Day on housing, is something that I'm really proud of, because we want to work with our municipal partners. We want to work with the private sector. We want to be and will be more deliberate and methodical about some of the additional creative ways that we think we can unlock supply and get it built and get it brought to market with the kind of partnerships that we need. So stay tuned for more details on it. But I'm excited about where we're going to go with it.
Yeah, I think just to follow on, the exclusionary zoning as of right in residential neighborhoods, and then you get into the planning issues around local decision making, the role of the consumer in the private sector. I'm not saying it's the only, but you need the private sector, but you also need those that own homes right now to be part of that solution. And there's competing demands between the private sector, between the homeowner themselves, and maybe wanting to have more density on their residential property. And I guess that's what you're highlighting here. And I hope that in the plan that it tries to connect those dots, because these things are not separate. They're totally interconnected. Right. And our friends at the KW Association of Realtors would tell you that is they've got both sides. They're dealing with developers, they're dealing with property owners, they're dealing with consumers, and it's very difficult to kind of make all those things fit.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I would say the other aspect of this to consider is that when you look at how big and unwieldy this challenge is, in the last federal campaign last year, we saw every political party, including the governing Liberals, talk about this, and they have some ambitious ideas that they are deploying and will continue to deploy around this space. I think it's an important thing for us to remember, because of how big and complex this problem is, no one level of government's going to get the job done on its own. That's another reason why I think it was disappointing to see members of the current provincial government really come down hard on municipal partners. This is not to say that any one level of government can't do better. I think all three levels do need to find a way to do better. But if the three levels or at least one particular level is attacking another level right now, that doesn't make any sense to me. That's not going to make it more affordable or easier for you to access the kind of housing that you need here in Waterloo Region across this province. We have to work together. Municipalities as real partners alongside the province, together alongside the federal government, both on the supply side, a little bit on the demand side, looking at the supply chain, looking at the skilled trade shortage that we have. It's a big challenge we're facing, but by having one level attack another level and suggest that it's just the municipality's fault, to me is a cop-out. And that's not how Ontario Liberals would do it.
Let's move on. Innovation, we are part of Canada's Innovation Corridor along from Toronto right through to Waterloo Region. I co-chair that Canada's Innovation Corridor Business Council with Jan De Silva. We have Shakiba and all the chambers right throughout the corridor that are talking about the importance of innovation, of talking about how technology and our friends at Google and take your pick, whether it's Desire to Learn, Open Text. There are so many anchor technology companies which are understanding that every business has a need for the technologies that they have. So talk about innovators and supporting innovators. It's not just about the big businesses, it's about how we support those that are creating new businesses, creating new technologies. And we'll talk later about procurement as it relates to that. But I do think that it is important to understand the philosophy of how a Liberal government would support innovators, the investment that they need and keeping Canadian companies Canadian and creating those jobs here, keeping that wealth here, and making sure that the investment continues to be here in Ontario and in Canada.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, I think that I'll say we as a province, but this region in particular, Ian, as you highlighted, has such an extraordinary track record of actually solving this challenge in many respects, because as you described, the stories of the different companies that have started here, have grown here, I think we have to learn the lessons of what actually worked. And I think what actually worked was government partnering with those entrepreneurs, with the women and men who had the ideas, who had the spark, who were prepared to take the risk, to make sure that they have the supports in place, be they financial, be they systemic, even things that you wouldn't normally think about directly as economic development, whether it's the healthcare conversation or the transit, unlocking connectivity between different regions, a file I know very, very well from my time as transportation minister. It's all part of that puzzle that you have to put together if you're going to support that kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And I think we've done, well, certainly here in this region, parts of Toronto and the GTA, parts of Ottawa or in Ottawa, I think we've done a really good job historically of building up those supports. And again, I go big believer in the private sector, big believer in free enterprise, but I think government has to partner and provide those supports, provide that provide that ecosystem in a way through ministries like economic development and growth, the supports that exist there, to make sure that we're doing it in a way that makes the most sense and actually produces the success stories. And Ontario Liberals will be very keen to be back in that space and to be working closely with Waterloo Region and all of your partners, all of your participants, to do it the right way.
So let's move on to talent, which is a huge issue right across Canada, frankly, but certainly here in Waterloo Region. For many of our businesses, especially those that are hospitality and tourism, we've talked about that, that reopening is not recovery. They can't get the staff to fully reopen even if they wanted to. That many businesses can't get the types of skills that they need. So whether it's and increasing immigration to get the talent that we need, foreign credentials recognition. We work very closely. I'm part of on the Council of the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, saying we need newcomers to be part of that solution. All that new employment in the province is going to come from newcomers to the province. If it's not already happening now, which I happen to think it's pretty close, but it's going to be within years. And we've got our partners here from the universities and the college this morning, and they're a huge part of filling those gaps, as is the private sector in terms of having experiential learning opportunities for students and those that are getting reskilling. I guess broadly, what's the talent agenda for a potential Liberal government? Because it is absolutely essential, and the crisis is now.
Yeah, so I'm glad Ian's asking me all the easy questions today. It's just as important as all the other topics that we've covered here. When you think about the fact that when you want the economy to grow, when you want to unlock that activity, that growth, that potential, but you're not able to access the workers, the skilled workers, and whatever sector we're talking about, you highlighted some of them, and it's such an important challenge that we do face. And I think it's a multi-pronged approach. So earlier when I was talking about housing and I referenced partnering with other levels of government, I think there needs to be, again, a very specific approach brought to the immigration system, whereby the province is working closely with the federal government to make sure that as tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of newcomers are coming to this province of ours, and we invite the world to come to Canada. We want the world to come to Canada, to Ontario, that we're doing it in a way where we're taking the talent that's coming to this country, harnessing it appropriately, and allowing it to flourish. And here's what I mean by that. We learned this during the pandemic in the healthcare space. We have thousands of internationally educated women and men, whether it's in healthcare or a variety of other sectors, that have come to this country, come to this province, and in a moment when we need them most, a system that's been allowed to continue in Ontario for far too many years essentially forces them to be in the bleachers instead of down on the field where we need them to be, working, competing, thriving, flourishing. To me, that makes no sense. It's never made any sense. We collectively have talked about this challenge for so many years, but we seem to have never found the right mix of here's how we break through it, here's how we get the job done. Not so that we eliminate standards, eliminate any kind of assessment criteria or systems we need in place, but just so that everybody who comes here who has a desire to work in the field for which they were trained has an understandable and relatively straightforward pathway to their own economic dignity, to their own prosperity. And we don't have that right now in far too many sectors. Here's another thing that I'm going to mention. I think that despite best efforts through the years, I think that we still don't do a good enough job as kids are entering high school, navigating through high school, and then looking on towards post-secondary or perhaps taking up a trade. I don't think we've done a good enough job, despite all of the labor market research that we should have at our disposal. In fact, that we do have at our disposal, to find a better way to align the pathways that younger Ontarians are choosing with the jobs that we know are likely to exist. There are far too few, I'll call them nudges within the system, so that my daughter, my older daughter, who's in grade 9, understands at the earliest moment possible. Not that she's forced to choose a particular path, but just that she's eyes wide open about what her future economic prospects will be, depending on what she chooses to study. And we know what those labor trends are. We have mountains of research, federally, provincially, outside of government, that show us, well, these are the sectors, these are the industries, these are the jobs where you're going to be able to find employment. And yet we don't have enough of an upfront kind of, I was going to use the word filtering, but I'll call it nudging system. So people are eyes wide open about making their choices as they're going through the rest of their education career. And I think we can do better there as well.
We talked this morning about the importance of not only the business community, and certainly Best Waterloo represents that, but the importance of having Lee from St. Mary's, and we had John Tibbetts from Conestoga College, and we have our two mayors as municipalities, post-secondary, healthcare, drive our economy as just as much as business, or it's an interrelated relationship. One of the things that we've seen during the pandemic is how challenged municipalities were when the economy closes down. So whether it's the region having to run transit, and in many cases keeping it going basically empty, but just letting healthcare workers and others get to work, having their facilities and programs not operating, they still have the same costs of staff, because whatever, I'm a reformed city councilor, so I should know this, but something like 80% of the entire cost is people. So it's not much to cut. The importance of having strong municipalities, not only here, but across the province, is going to be important. And you talk about that window of time of, there's going to be a period of time when I think it's important for the provincial government who has the resources to invest or to be partnering with municipalities, because we can't afford, when we're looking to investors to come and set up roots here and build a new plant or make a further investment, to have weak municipalities financially because of the pandemic. Maybe talk about the importance of that and what that relationship's going to look like, because I think the next 2 or 3 years are going to be challenging. And I would preface, these are all the easy questions because there's no end of asks and a need, and there's still the reality that whoever the next provincial government is going to have to face.
So I think we have a governmental system in this country. God bless us. It's a great country and it's a great system, and it's served us so well. That is outdated. It's outdated. I mean, you have to face that fact. When you think about everything that municipalities are responsible for and how important they are to our day-to-day lives, it's just bizarre to me that though it's gotten a little bit better over the last number of years, in many respects, municipalities are still considered a bit of an afterthought in the prime-time conversation between so-called senior levels of government. That makes no sense to me. I said this, I think, at an AMO, an Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference. I think it was last year. I think we're at a point now where we have to have a new conversation, all 3 levels of government. And this is where my team's eyes glaze over, because I talk about the need to redesign the fiscal architecture of our federation. See how that just rolls off the tongue? It's good retail politics. Notice the two mayors are clapping as I said that, and only the two mayors are clapping.
Well, it's good. My staff roll their eyes at me just about every day for any particular
There
reason.
you
So
go.
at least, yeah.
But I don't think it's a conversation between the federal government and the provincial government, and then whatever crumbs fall off the table might land arbitrarily, depending on the mood of the moment, might land in the laps of a municipal. I think all three levels need to be at the same table, engaged equally in the same conversation, so that we actually get what you need. A governmental system, a democracy that doesn't serve politicians, but serves people. And right now that's missing, and it's outdated, and it needs to be modernized. And as premier of this province, that is something I will be asking of the federal government and inviting the municipalities to come with me, shoulder to shoulder, to that conversation with our federal partners, because it's long, long overdue.
Okay, Carolyn's going to start waving wildly in about 2 minutes, but I have one more question, and I think it kind of wraps up. We talked about it this morning, and it's really around procurement, especially for small business. I think it's really important that when we talk about healthcare innovation, when we talk about innovators creating businesses here, when we talk about the opportunity for job creation, and that's going to come from the small, medium-sized business sector. And they have virtually no way of decoding the I would say if someone can figure out the caramel secret of procurement, they'd make a lot of money for small business, but no one's figured it out yet. I said to you earlier, 12 years ago, Minister Malloy made an attempt at this, and we gave him some advice. It is a big behemoth. The importance for supply chains, for supporting local jobs across the province, supporting small business innovators, incredibly important. Is that something you're going to take a stab at? Because I think it addresses a number of different issues.
Yes, we will for sure. I'm just going to tell you that when I was running to be leader of the party, I'm so proud of this. I wrote an op-ed that appeared in an internal publication at Queen's Park called, I think, Queen's Park Briefing, and it was about the need for urgent procurement reform. I know that you've all read that op-ed very, very closely. My team's eyes glaze over because I talk about procurement. I am excited about the conversation of procurement. Here's what I think the biggest problem is that we have within public, I'll say public sector procurement in Ontario as it relates to economic development opportunities for made in Ontario businesses, made in Ontario talent. We have a bit of I call it an inferiority complex in the way that we review the proof points that we require of domestic entrepreneurs to demonstrate that they can do the job, that we don't ask of those who are from outside of Ontario. And I've heard this story from so many small and medium-sized businesses, leaders, entrepreneurs who say that they can more easily access public dollars and public work in New York State than they can right here in Ontario. And they're based here in Ontario. That's wrong. And an Ontario Liberal government will tackle that head on.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have today. Dana's going to come up from my team. A small token of Waterloo Region goodies to get you on the road from here to Toronto. And hopefully you're not in a sugar-induced coma by the time you get home. But thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to once again thank our partners and sponsors. Without them, these events don't happen. Our title sponsor, Manulife, our prestige sponsor, Deloitte, platinum sponsor, Google, silver sponsor, Clack, bronze sponsor, the KW Association of Realtors. Our event partner today is the Guelph Chamber of Commerce and my Best Waterloo partners. Our hosts here, Cellar 52 and Guilt Catering. And of course, to all of you for joining us both in person and virtually. We hope you've enjoyed today. Our next two events are scheduled. The next one going to be on Monday with Mike Schreiner of the Green Party. Thanks so much for making time out of your busy schedule to join us. We look forward to having you back soon.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you all. Take care.
Have a great afternoon.